And I want to thank all of those who have got in and had a go at the assignment, had a look at that crash report and crash diagram, and maybe looked a little bit at the site as well through the 360-degree footage of that area, and then answer the question. A few people still yet to jump in there and do that. I encourage you to get in there and have a go at it. Remember, you do have 3 attempts at these, so don't get too stressed out about it. If you're umming and ahhing, you can have a go, and then you could have another attempt if you like. So this session, we have Tanner presenting a whole lot about the specifics of crashes and looking at vehicles and different aspects of the vehicles that have been involved in crashes and the scenes and the like. So we're going to go into quite a bit of in-depth detail. There's quite a lot of photos of crash scenes and crashed vehicles, and then trying to determine different information from that. We have Yoen in the background there. He'll be just sitting in the background. We may reach out to him if we need, but he won't be presenting anything this session. Yoen will be back again for our next session, which is tomorrow. Reminding you, it's now tomorrow due to spur of the moment public holidays that have arrived. So it is tomorrow, 2 o'clock Australian Eastern Standard Time tomorrow. So hopefully you've got the email. If not, please get in contact with me. Now remember, do pop your questions into the chat. Tanner has a couple of points along the way where he'll be asking you questions with polls or getting you to type in there and the like, but we do want your questions and comments, and as per usual, I'll be in the background and I'll feed those to Tanner as we go. So Tanner, do you want to try sharing your screen there? We'll make sure that all works, and then we'll get ourselves going.
Okay, so I've just shared my screen. Just get a quick thumbs up from Ken if everything's good. Perfect.
Yep.
Okay.
And now we can't see your cursor. If you want to point to something, or do you want to check that?
Yep. So cursor's on the screen now. Oops.
No.
Can you see the cursor? No. If not, I'm just going to swap to the laser pointer. Let me try laser pointer.
Yep.
Is that?
Yep, we can see that.
Perfect. All right, I'll stick with laser pointer. Okay. So welcome everyone to this third session. This third session is being broken down into 3 modules, so 3.1, 3.2, and 3.3. First module is going to be about 45 minutes long. Then we'll have a bit of a break. Second module, 3.2, roughly about 45 minutes, 50 minutes as well. Then we'll have another break, and then we'll go to the last module, 3.3, which is much shorter, should take about 20, 25 minutes. Okay, so Johan has taken you through the roads and roadside side of things for crash investigation, for safe systems and energy management. So I'm going to go into a bit of a deep dive now with the vehicle inspection side of things. So the topics I'd like to cover in module 3.1 is the vehicle information gathering. How do we gather vehicle information? How to inspect and interpret vehicle damage. And then we'll go briefly into injury mechanisms and occupant contact points within the vehicle. So let's kick off with the very first item here is why do we collect vehicle information? So essentially what we need to do is understand what vehicle we're dealing with in a crash. Vehicles can behave very differently depending on the weight of, or the mass in engineering speak, and also location, center of gravity. So for example, a utility SUV with high center of gravity will behave somewhat differently to a sedan, which has a lower center of gravity. Crash patterns can also be quite different as well, depending on the vehicle type. And we can also sometimes estimate the crash velocity by comparing a previously crashed vehicle to, comparing a NCAP crashed vehicle to the vehicle that we're looking at as well. So hence vehicle information is quite important. And to do this, I recommend going to the vehicle or the VIN, vehicle identification number. It's usually located at the base of the windscreen, or sometimes inside the engine bay, close to the base of the windscreen. This will not only identify the make and model, but actually give you the variant as well. And variants can make a difference in your crash modeling because they vary depending on weight. Some of them have 4 doors, some of them station wagon 5 doors. The length can be different as well. So these small minor variations can be important in crash investigation and specifically crash reconstruction. So that's how I would identify a vehicle. Obviously, you can also go to the back of the vehicle and just read the make and model as well. But to go into detail, definitely get the VIN. Okay, so as mentioned earlier, so what type of information level detail that you need to go into will depend very much on the level of reconstruction. This will cover it in module 3.3 a bit later on. So for basic reconstruction, you generally just need the mass of the vehicle and the dimensions. If you're going to go to next level detail, you may want to get the center of gravity, the mass distribution amongst the 4 tires or in front and rear tires, and the vehicle model and variant and so on and so forth, which I mentioned earlier. For the most advanced reconstruction, you may need to start going into details such as the suspension damping rate, the tire properties, sheet metal properties, and glass properties. But again, this is probably the most advanced one, which most of us would not necessarily have to perform. But as I mentioned, we'll go through this in module 3.3 in more detail. So once we've gathered our vehicle information, the next step is to look at the vehicle itself that's been involved in the crash. So firstly, when we do look at a vehicle that's been involved in a crash, we'd like to firstly identify what the collision type is, whether it's frontal impact, a side impact, a rear impact, or even a rollover. And to do this, I start from the largest crush to smallest crush, the largest deformation to smallest deformation, the largest scrapes to small scrapes, and the largest scratches to small scratches. These terms I'll define very shortly, just bear with me. So basically what we're doing is looking at the largest damage to the smallest and repeating this over and over until we get a good image of what had actually occurred at the crash site. Don't forget to also identify any prior damage to the vehicle, because we obviously don't want to take this into account. And most vehicles on the road do have some minor damage, dints and dents. Could be from collision with the shopping trolley as well at the local supermarket. So do keep that in mind as well and exclude this from your investigation. Also identify damage that may have been caused by the rescue crew from them handling the vehicle, and also from evidence degradation. So if a vehicle has been stored in a storage facility that's outdoors, take into account that some degradation of the evidence may have also occurred, especially if it's in wet conditions like rain or snow. So keep that in mind. Also, when you look at vehicles, do take into account that there are some harder parts of the vehicle that won't deform as much as if the same force was applied to a softer part of the vehicle. So, for example, the pillars that support the roof are generally very strong. So the same force applied to those parts of the vehicles will not cause as much damage as if it was applied to, let's say, the bonnet of the vehicle, which is much softer and it's designed for deformation and force absorption, or energy absorption to be specific. I'd also recommend using the O-clock system, which I'll run through in a later slide. So just a bit of a heads up over the next few slides, and I guess throughout this whole module 3.1, that you will see vehicles or images of crashed vehicles. So to get stuck into vehicle inspection, what I'd like to do is to walk you through a case study. So this case study is obtained from the US, from their NAS CDS system, which, similar to the German system, is very, very comprehensive crash documentation system. So bear in mind that you are going to see vehicles that are driven with the steering wheel on the left-hand side, so it's reversed to that of Australia. So in this particular diagram here, what we can see is vehicle 1, which I've highlighted with the green line, is traveling southbound and entered in intersection. And vehicle 2, which is highlighted orange with the orange line, is traveling northbound and entered the intersection. And at the intersection, the front left of both vehicles collided with each other. So that's a background to what had happened in this crash, and let's have a look at the resultant damage from to the vehicles. So this is vehicle 1 here. And as we can see, I've highlighted in the red circle, this is where the damage occurred, so front left-hand side of the vehicle. I'm just going to do I'll take you through another shot of this from a slightly different angle. So again, you can see that the force of impact had come from the front, had impacted initially the front bumper. And then as the two vehicles started to engage with each other, it then caused damage to the front left fender. It's going to walk you through another image here, taken from the front left side of this vehicle, so you can see the damage a bit clearer. And next, I'm going to move on to the other vehicle. So this is the silver vehicle here. And as you can see in the circle, the red circle, this is where the damage has been sustained from the other vehicle. And we know this from the blue streaks that have been left behind. So this is telltale sign of where two vehicles have contact each other. It usually leaves paint marks. I'm going to zoom in a bit and walk you through where this is frontal impact. And you can see where the other vehicle had started engaging with this vehicle because it's very, very light striations or scratch marks. And then it becomes darker and darker as the two vehicles starts to engage more with each other. Over here, I'm just going to zoom in again, and you can see the lighter marks followed by the darker marks. I'm going to move further down to the side of the vehicle where the door is next, because this is where the other vehicle had also impacted the vehicle when two vehicles came to rest. And we can see this through the circle that I've just placed on the screen here. So that's the first case study. The second one I'm going to go through next is of a side impact. So this vehicle was traveling through into the section and was impacted by another vehicle on the left-hand side. This vehicle ran a red light, hence the crash that occurred. So we can see that the vehicle, the impact of the vehicle had impacted this vehicle in the front left door. You can see this is the area where most of the damage has occurred. You can see what we call secondary damage or deformation, highlighted blue here and here. So these are areas where the other vehicle had not impacted this vehicle directly, but because of the amount of crush that occurred in the front left door, this has also deformed adjacent panels. So this is something you want to keep an eye out for as well when you go to inspect vehicles, to identify where the primary impact had occurred. Now, early on, I also mentioned that we want to keep in mind any damage that may have been caused by the rescue crew. So in this particular image here, we can see that the A pillar, the front pillar of the vehicle, has been cut. And this was cut by the Jaws of Life, which is the image on the right-hand side. So rescue crews will, if they cannot pry open the door manually, they will cut the pillars in order to get to the occupants and to extract them. So keep in mind that this may occur as well on the vehicles that you may be inspecting, and don't count this towards the primary damage. Early on, also mentioned the o'clock system. So what it is the vehicle that you're inspecting is your reference vehicle, and you use the o'clock system to identify the direction where the force had impacted the vehicle. So if we've got a vehicle that was impacted from the front, we say it's a 12 o'clock impact. So force comes from 12 o'clock. If the vehicle sustained impact from the right-hand side, we call it 3 o'clock. From the rear, it's 6 o'clock. And from the left-hand side, it's 9 o'clock. So keep in mind that this is always in relation to the vehicle that you're inspecting. Okay, Ken, any questions? I can't quite see the chat, so I'm hoping that everything's all good, all clear.
No, we're having a little bit of a chat in the background, but you keep going.
Okay, cool, no problems at all. Okay, so now I mentioned a couple of terminologies in the previous slides. So let's define them a bit more formally now. So if you look at a vehicle, the primary impact area is called crush. So this is damage due to direct impact by another vehicle or object. And I'll show you examples of this very shortly. Deformation, it's damage due to crush. So this is not due to the direct impact, but it's due to the crush that has then deformed other panels. Scrape is gouging the vehicle. And scratch is predominantly just paint damage with no gouging or indentation. Now, in the last session, Johan mentioned a term called intrusion. So intrusion is basically the reduction of vehicle occupant space due to an impact. So these are FERF terminologies that we'll be using quite a fair bit. So if you'd like to do a screenshot of this, please go ahead. But I believe you've also got a copy of the slide deck as well. So if that's handy and you prefer to use that, please go ahead and do that as well. Okay, so let's walk through a couple of examples. And this is the image from before. So over here in circle in red is crush. So this is where the other vehicle impacted this vehicle. And as a result of this crush, there have been a few other panels of the vehicle which has sustained deformation. Whoops, sorry. So it's highlighted in yellow there. Now let's revisit the first case study as well, because I'll give you a few more definitions from this. So this is crush, and again, crush is due to direct impact with another vehicle. In yellow here is deformation, and this is due to the crush. Scraping, where there is a bit of gouging involved, shown here. And this is what we call scratch. So that's basically paint being scratched off or scratched onto. We'll move further down the door as well, and I'll give you now two examples. So this is here scratch, and this here is scraping. So there's a bit of gouging here. Ken, you've popped up again.
Yes. Now there's a few questions coming in, and I can't quite remember whether you cover this in more detail, but there's a number of people asking for the specific difference between crush and intrusion.
Okay.
Sorry, and the difference between crush and deformation.
Okay, all right. Let me just go back. Bear with me a second. Let's go back. So two questions. First one is the difference between crush and intrusion. Yep.
Intrusion, that's correct. Yep.
Okay. So crush is predominantly, we're focusing on the outside, the exterior of the vehicle. So I'll go through this one here. So here, this panel here has been crushed. If we look inside the vehicle, we potentially, in this case, we do see intrusion. So that's basically a reduction in the area of the cabin of the vehicle. Now, I have images later on, or not image, but slides later on, which will make this much clearer. But crush is external vehicle, and crush can result in intrusion. And intrusion is basically the reduction of the occupant space.
Yeah. So and I think your crumple zones in the front of the vehicle are an example of they will be crushed, but they're trying to stop the intrusion into the cabin space.
Absolutely spot on. Yeah. Good example.
So that's good. And then the next one was deformation. And you've got your first two there. The difference between crush.
So difference between crush and deformation.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I'll use this image as an example again. So this vehicle here, as I mentioned, was impacted by another vehicle on this door. So the damage caused by the other vehicle on this door is called crush. And it's because it's primary impact. So two vehicles colliding with each other, where they have engaged with each other, that damage is called crush. Now, what has happened here as a result of crush is that you can see that some of this metal component here, which is where the door hinges is, has been pulled in by this door, by the impact due to this door. And this has then pulled this sheet metal inwards towards the cabin. Similarly, this door here, although it was not impacted directly by the other vehicle, but because this door has wedged itself, this front door has wedged itself into this rear door, it has then deformed this door. So hence that's deformation. So it's considered a secondary damage.
Thank you. Another one, and this is slightly off the definitions that you're giving, which are really good, and we certainly will use these in lots of case studies coming up. So it's good that people really get their head around this. The tires, and so there's a question in that says they assume that you would inspect the tires to try to determine whether the flat tire occurred during the incident or before the incident, which could have been a contributing factor.
Absolutely, yes. That's a very good point. And yes, I agree. Do inspect the tires as well, not just for damage and whether they're inflated before or deflated before or after the crash, but also the make and model of the tire as well. If you're going to do some advanced reconstruction, you will be able to look up properties of those tires, and they do affect the behavior of the vehicle quite a fair bit. As to whether you can determine whether tires inflated or deflated before or after, that can be quite tricky. Tires can deflate due to impacts and roller crashes. So yes, agree. Do take note of it. But generally speaking, it's very difficult to drive a car. If a tire were to deflate before a crash, it usually would be a result of a catastrophic failure of the tire itself, but not always. Johan, you just popped in there. You might have some insights into this as well from your investigations.
Yeah, thanks, Tana. Just a quick one. I think, as you say, it's pretty difficult but sometimes you would see that if it's inflated or deflated before the vehicle comes to a stop and you have skiddings or something, you can see dirt or grass or something stuck between the rim and the rubber of the tire on the deflated one, which you don't have on something that's actually inflated. So you'll see much more dirt and debris and stuff got stuck in that tire, and that's a clue. But I don't think there's an absolute foolproof way of doing it. But if you find a lot of debris inside the tire, obviously you could see that, yeah, that something's happened before the vehicle come to a stop.
Yeah, agreed. No, thank you, Johan, for that. Yes, can be very, very tricky there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Naomi's also popped in there a good point about looking at the tread of the tires. And Mark's made some other neat points around how to think about deformation, and that's to everybody. So I'll let people read that. One other point I was going to make, and this was a bit of the earlier discussion, is around road authority representatives or those working with road authorities in doing these investigations and the like. Don't often have access to these vehicles, but we will talk later at the end and a bit tomorrow about why we are particularly interested with this information and knowing these terms and the like. And really, sort of spoiler alert here, the real reason is that you want to understand whether these are within system boundaries or not, or whether there were particular aspects of the vehicle that we need to transform our system to cater for, or whether these are features of the vehicles will be safety features of vehicles will be increasing, or there was vehicle malfunction, or these sorts of things that we as road authorities know that will come along on the journey. So back to you, Tanner.
Yeah, no problems. Great points, and likewise at the point on the on tire as well. So let me just skip back to where we were. So I've gone through this. Okay, so earlier I also mentioned that we can sometimes use ANCAP crash-tested vehicles to gauge the rough velocity at which our crashed vehicle that we're expecting might have impacted it at. So on the left-hand side, we've got a Skoda, I believe this is an Octavia, crash at 64 kilometers an hour, frontal impact crash test. And on the right-hand side, we've actually got a crash vehicle that impacted another vehicle at 55 kilometers an hour. So you can use this as a rough gauge. Comes in handy, so this I thought I'd put in as a bit of a tip. Okay, so next few slides, or next couple of slides, is a bit of a pop quiz. So Kenny, I'm wondering if you can get the pop quiz window up. So my question here is this a, let me just move this out of the way for you. Is this a crush, deformation, scrape, or scratch?
Okay, good question you've got in there, Tanner, because we've just defined them all, and good way to check if people were listening there. So you've got the crash vehicle, and for anybody who hasn't noticed, you can pick up the poll box and move it around if it's in front of your in front of that photo for you. So hopefully that's worked for you. I assume that's the case from people's end, but we're seeing lots of answers coming in. I'll give it another 5 seconds for people to have their guess. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'm going to end that poll. And we're seeing most people saying they think that is crush. Tanner, are you agreeing with that?
Yep, and those people would be absolutely spot on. So this is crush, and this is due to this vehicle impacting a pole. And the damage I've circled there is a direct impact of the pole, and hence it's called crush. Okay, so next slide here is a bit trickier. So is this crush, deformation, scrape, or scratch?
Okay, people can just type that one into the chat. And yes. Oh, this one we're seeing a few different answers here. We've got deformation, crush, scrape, scrape, deformation, scrape, deformation, scrape. We've got a sort of even split between deformation and scrape there.
Yep.
What is
okay? So this one here is, oh, we've got a few more answers coming in. Yep, that's cool. It is indeed scrape. So this vehicle is damaged by another vehicle. It's a secondary impact. So the other vehicle basically spun and contacted this vehicle very, very, very lightly here. You can see that it's not a scratch because there's actually an indentation there. So hence this is a scrape.
Okay, and yes, and Kristen's sort of pointing out that really wanted to see other bits of the vehicle to be able to determine. I think that's a really valid point, and it's very hard for us to do without getting around the vehicle, but or having 20 photos of the vehicle. But yeah, good. Thank you.
No problems at all. No problems at all. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide. And okay, so what I want to show you next few slides is how you can measure crush. So over here, we've got a vehicle that sustained quite a catastrophic side-on impact, which resulted in a fatality of the driver. So what we sometimes measure on site is the crush depth. So this is depth, the maximum depth which the vehicle crushed, maximum depth at which the crush has occurred. So up here, this is a top-down view. So we don't actually measure it from at the base of the vehicle. This is actually part way up of the vehicle. So I'm going to walk you through a few slides which will crystallize how crush depth is being measured. But before I do that, over here, I thought I'd just point out to you that this vehicle's pillars were also cut by the jaws of life to extract the vehicle occupant. So over here, we've got a side impact. This occurred from right side of the vehicle. What we have here, I've highlighted, I've put down in red, is a string which is used to indicate the datum in which the investigators were using to measure the crush depth. So you can see that the crush has occurred on the right front and right rear door here. And we've got this contraption here, which I'll walk you through as to what these are step by step. So that's crush depth there. So basically, they've identified that this is the maximum crush that has occurred in this location. The horizontal pole basically is used to map out the profile of the crush. And the vertical pole is used to indicate or used by the inspectors to measure the depth from the datum point to the depth. So I'll go to the next example here. So this is another vehicle, side impact on the left-hand side. And on the next slide, I'll show you through the setup that has been used here. So as we can see, there's the datum point, which is the string there. We've got the vertical pole, so they've indicated that at that point there, that's the area of the most significant crush or deepest crush depth. Highlight there. And the datum is there. And what they do is basically just keep moving this pole to each of the horizontal pole and measure the crush depth, and then you've got a profile of the crush. And that's basically the profile that you would draw on your documentation, and you can then indicate at each of these horizontal poles the crush depth at those points. And that's a horizontal pole there. Okay, so that's how you measure crush depth. On the next few slides, I'm going to show you another case study and how we then indicate the areas that's been damaged on the vehicle when we document this. So this vehicle here was involved in a rollover crash. So 4/4 turn, so that's basically one full rotation of the vehicle. About its longitudinal or the long axis of the vehicle. And this is the image of the vehicle from the right-hand side. You can see where it had rolled over onto the ground. The A-pillar has been pushed down quite a fair bit, and it landed on its roof. This is the left side of the vehicle, which hasn't sustained a significant amount of damage. So with this particular vehicle here, if you were to draw this on your documentation, you indicate it by using hatching or cross-hatching. So cross-hatching is usually indicating the area of most significant damage. So you can see the top here of the roof, as well as the door. Whereas when they use single-line hatching, it's indicating some damage, but not necessarily as extensive or severe as the primary impacted area. And again, you can see that they've indicated that that's been some damage on the front as well, front right-hand side. So walk to the left-hand side. So left-hand side, as I said before, has not sustained a significant amount of damage. It's indicated sustained some damage on the front and left side and a bit on the door as well. So if you look very closely here, the door gap here has actually been pushed open by this rollover crash. So hence they've indicated that as well. We look at the top. Again, they've indicated most significant damage by cross-hatching there. And most of the areas are single line, which indicating some damage, but not as severe as that of the front. Windscreen, you basically draw squiggly lines to indicate where it's been damaged. And in this case, it's pretty much the whole windscreen. Now, a question I was asked earlier is crush versus intrusion. So these next few slides are going to walk you through how we can measure intrusion. So in the image on the left-hand side here, we've got a vehicle that's been impacted on the left. And we can see on the outside, this is what's called the crush. But because this diagram relates to the interior of the vehicle, if we indicate that the intruded area is here. So we can measure intrusion by, if we've got the if this vehicle has only been impacted on the left-hand side and the right-hand side has not sustained any impacts, we can then use the right-hand side as a comparison point or data point. So basically we measure from the center line of the vehicle to, let's say, the start of the roof liner where it meets the rear door. And let's say that's 750 millimeters or 0.75 of a meter. We then compare to the left-hand side, which has sustained the impact or crush. And let's say we've measured that to be 0.5. So therefore we can then say that there's been intrusion of 0.75 meters. So intrusion again is focusing on the reduction of internal space of the occupant cabin. Similarly, we can do this for the front as well, front left-hand side. So if this vehicle has been has sustained a crush in this area, there may be some intrusion, there may not. We can then measure the intrusion here compared to the right-hand side, which has not sustained any intrusion. I'll give you, sorry, I forgot that I actually did circle this in blue. So blue is basically the datum, red's basically the area of interest to us. Now, in some cases, you may find that the damage caused to the vehicle is actually quite severe, especially in rollover crashes. So therefore, you may need to find an undamaged, or in this case, we call them standard vehicle to measure from. And same thing, you apply the same method. You measure from a center point or a data point to a particular area. So let's say C in this case, and then compare it to that of the crush vehicle, and then you measure the intrusion from that. So hoping that this makes it much clearer as well. Okay. Okay, so now we've walked through quite a number of examples of vehicle crashes, and this is another pop quiz to start you focusing on your vehicle inspection eyes. So my question here is, which direction is the principal direction of force? So this is the direction where the impact has the other vehicles impacted this vehicle. So
I think we've got a poll on this one, do we?
I think we do have a poll.
Red arrow or blue arrow? I'm going to launch that, and while people have a look at that, so which arrow, A or B, indicates the principal direction of force? Now, there was a question in, and I'm pretty sure you're going to cover this later on, but it's asking around when you're measuring crush depth and determining impact force and the like, is this how you determine vehicle speed of bullet vehicles or the like in crashes?
It can be used as an potential indication. It's very, very rough, so I would not use just crush and deformation. Tire marks would be another way, potentially either using that individually or augmenting it with crush. To use crush, you really need quite a fair bit of experience to make a call. So as I forgot to mention earlier on, that crash investigation can be as much of an art as it is a science. But the most definitive way to do this is to actually run a crash reconstruction on your computer.
Yeah, that's right. I think the point is this course isn't about teaching the full crash reconstruction methodology and the software and how to plug all of this in. It's really, at this point, us trying to give indications of what measurements the police and others will be taking, getting the terminology right, understanding some of these things. So when we get those reports from the police or we get the photos and the like, as road authority representatives, we're able to make some informed judgment around that. Yuen, did you want to make a comment on that?
Yeah, just a very quick comment, sort of going back to what Tana mentioned yesterday. Sometimes it could be quite helpful to just go to the Euro NCAP or to the ANCAP or other NCAP's websites to look at the crash tests, because they have crash tests on frontal impact, side impact, and pole impact, and you get an idea of what should a 5-star vehicle be able to take, and what does that type of crash look like in 30K, 50K, 60K, and you compare that to your vehicle and you get a sort of an understanding if you're above that, or if you're really above it, or if you're quite below it. Now, again, as Tana said, it depends quite a lot on the structure of the vehicle, how it's designed and things like that, but at least to give you sort of a first idea where you're at.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think Tana might have or have just shown or have a photo of that coming up. Now, I'm going to end this poll and we're going to share the results. So most people are saying A there, although this one's not as clear cut. So a little bit of people scratching their head and looking closely at it. What are your comments there, Tana?
Yeah, absolutely understand. And I guess I've picked not necessarily a clear-cut one because it's essentially what you may be dealing with if you're looking at photos. The answer to this one is A. So the impact was a front-on impact with another vehicle. And the way we know this is by looking at the folds on the vehicle bonnet. You can see that it has been pushed in this direction. So sometimes it helps to think about vehicle panels as almost like a cloth-like structure. And whichever direction you push that cloth, that's the direction that you'll find that the creases will go in the sort of a perpendicular direction to the force. If this vehicle is impacted from B, the left-hand side of the vehicle, the creases are likely to be, or very, very likely to be, perpendicular to the arrow B. So that's a bit of insight for you as you look at crashed vehicles. Next one here, another example. I don't know whether we can get another poll up, but I guess people can type it into the chat if need be, Ken. So while I explain it, Ken, if you wouldn't mind having a quick look. This should be
I've got another poll for you.
Okay, so there's another one. Perfect. Okay, this is a lot trickier. I've picked this one on purpose. It certainly will test most of us out there, so don't be afraid if you get this wrong. So these are 3 images of this vehicle that's been involved in a crash. My question, take a screenshot of this if you like. Let's leave it up for a few seconds. It should be in your slides as well. So I'm going to go on to the next slide. where I ask, which is the principal direction of force? So A, and this is top down, that same vehicle, A, B, or C.
Oh, okay. So I'll get that poll up now, and maybe we'll give people a little bit of time on that. We might go back just as well.
Yeah,
So it's a tricky one you got going on there.
I'll go back a slide. So now it is not easy. And remember what I said earlier, you look from the biggest to the smallest. The detail here is in the small parts of the image. Very tricky. So again, don't be afraid if you don't get it right.
Okay. People are still looking intensely at it. We'll give it a few more seconds on this one, and then we might go to the overhead image again, and then we'll get people to put their final guesses in.
Yeah.
Yep. Andrew wants to see the arrows again, so let's jump forward
cool.
one
I'll go
slide.
forward one slide. Yep.
Few people wanting to take back their guess, which is not an option in that. Okay, I'll give it another couple of seconds, then I'm going to end this, and then we'll get Tanner to explain a little bit on this one. 3, 2, 1, and let's share the results on that. So that's an interesting one. And most people go blue, but then an even secondary split on the red and green arrow there.
Yeah.
So it was a difficult, tricky one. What do you say?
Absolutely. Okay, so there's two ways you can approach this one. One is, as I mentioned earlier, that you look for the creases in the sheet metal. In this case, you can see that the crease is going roughly in this direction, as I'm pointing at the red arrow, which will then indicate to you that it is indeed B. So the other way of doing this is through process of elimination. And sometimes you may need to use both. So I'm just going to go back one slide here to show you how I would have approached this one. So I would initially say, okay, let's hypothetically say it's frontal impact. And if it was a frontal impact, yes, you would see some of this damage here, no doubt. But it would not explain why this piece is still in place and the sheet metal underneath it is still actually predominantly in place as well. But that's only a plausible explanation, because sometimes the frontal impact could have just occurred predominantly in this area. So this is the area of crush, and this is just deformation. All right. So I said, okay, that's not necessarily ruling out frontal impact completely. So we then say, okay, let's just say it's side impact. So it was a side impact. I would then expect that this fender here would be pushed into the direction that I'm motioning at the moment. So that is to the left of your screen. But we don't actually see that here. You can see that this panel has actually got a gap, which means that it has been popped out of its place. So it's moved outwards from the engine bay. And then when we look here, there's actually a crease that falls upwards in this bonnet. And when I said early on, the devil's in the detail, this tells me that the impact had actually come from the diagonal direction and pushed this bonnet upwards. And you confirm that by looking at the crease marks from the top image. So this is why documenting, getting photos from all angles is really important, especially if you're going to be looking at it when you get to the back to the desk. So you use it to process of deduction of elimination, but then try to find something that's a bit more concrete. Not trying to say that that's not as a pun. In this case, it's actually the fold that gives it away, that this is the direction of impact.
Yeah, thanks, Tanner. I think that's a neat way to sort of talk us through those, working through the different ways. And just a clarification here. So would this be an 11 o'clock crash?
Yep, around about 10 to 11 o'clock crash. Yep, absolutely spot on.
Well done. Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Can see someone's already applying that elk clock system. Brilliant.
Yeah,
Okay.
getting ready for the quiz, obviously, without knowing it.
Nice work. Okay, so just a bit of a heads up. There are images of crash vehicles and interior vehicles with dry blood coming up. So if you look at the exterior vehicle, and now we're going to move on to the interior vehicle. So in a crash, there are, going to the injury mechanism, occupant contact point. I'm just one slide ahead of myself. So we're going to understand the number of impacts in a crash, identifying the occupant to vehicle contact points, and also interpreting the interior vehicle contact marks. So in a crash, there are actually 3 crashes. The first one's a vehicle with an external object. In this case, it's against an ANCAP crash test honeycomb structure. The second, so that's highlighted in red. The second impact is with the vehicle's occupant and the vehicle interior, in this case, thankfully, an airbag, although it's a dummy, so they generally don't feel pain. And thirdly is the impact between the occupant's internal organs and other internal organs. In this case, with the airbag impact, if the deceleration is severe enough, you would get some parts of the brain moving and potentially impacting against the skull, causing a bruise. But hopefully not seeing that as an impact. But if it's steering wheel, then it is possible that this may occur. So what we're focusing on here in this last part of this module is the impact between the second impact, which is occupant versus the vehicle interior. So the best way to do this is let's go through a case study. So this is just giving you some background information. So we've got vehicle 1 that was traveling eastbound, so that's up your screen. It impacted a truck very briefly with its front right corner and did a 180 degree spin before coming to a rest. And when I said front left corner, it actually did take the whole front left corner of the vehicle, and you'll see in the next couple of slides. So this is the, front right corner. So this is the resultant of that crash. You can, this is for background information. We're looking through from driver's side through the passenger side at the moment. You can see that the pillar has been cut open by rescue crew. I'm going to zoom in a bit more and look at some of the blood marks on the vehicle. So what we're looking for in vehicle interior with occupant contact points is firstly if there's blood marks. If you see a bit of splashing like you can over here, this tends to indicate that's not where the occupant had contacted. So this mark is very similar to, let's say, having a wet toothbrush with paint, and you just flick the bristles basically. So this is what has occurred here. What we're really looking for, so blood spatter in the blue circle. What we're really looking for here is blood smear. So this is where the occupant had actually physically contacted the vehicle interior. So what I've circled here in red is blood smear, so you don't get that splatter mark. And I'll give you another example, which is a bit clearer. So here, that is an occupant contact point. This yellow tape, by the way, is just basically a sticker measuring tape. So it's got adhesive one side, and you can just rip it off and put it on there. So you got a frame of reference. But what I'm really interested in here is the blood smear that's occurred on this plastic object. And the next image here is, again, much clearer. So I'm giving you examples, you know, what you may be looking out for. It's not always clear cut, but this one here is quite clear cut. You can see that the blood has basically been pressed into the fabric here, and there's not a splatter mark like the first image I showed you. Now, if the occupant has sustained any injury that result in a perforation skin, thus letting out blood, you will then be looking at skin and oil marks. So our skin naturally contains a layer of oil and sometimes grime as well, and this can leave marks. The clearest of this is usually indicated on the airbag. So this is from the same case here. The airbag inflated, and normally the airbag, because it's sealed away for the majority of the life of the vehicle, if not whole life of the vehicle, if the vehicle has never been an accident or crash rather, is predominantly very, very bright white or silver. If an occupant were to contact the airbag, you'd then see you see skin/oil marks as, let me just put up that circle, it's much easier that way, as I've highlighted through these circles here. Yellow measuring tape, again, just gives you an idea of scale. I'm going to zoom in so you can get a better idea of what these marks look like. So that's another one there. Okay, so that's first case study. Let's go to the next one here. So this one here is a vehicle that's traveling, vehicle 1 is traveling northwest and entered in intersection. And it was impacted by vehicle 2, which coming from the opposite direction. And that was a left-hand side impact on vehicle 1, sorry. So here, just as background information here, you can see the severity of damage by just looking at the way the B-pillar, this pillar here, has been pushed in or intruded into space, which start using our terms, and the extent that the front left seat has actually been pushed in. You can see it's resting up against the armrest as well. So this was a fatal crash, unfortunately. So this is taken from the direction of crush. Again, just background information. And now let's zoom into some of the oil/skin marks. So this is on the left-hand door. You can see skin marks here. So this is roughly, not always looks like this, but roughly what you'd be looking at for. And they tend to be very fresh marks as well. So, and that's basically what you are trying to identify in the vehicle. So this occupant here, the driver, hadn't contacted this part of the vehicle door interior. Likewise here, they've also contacted the door handle here and left their skin mark there. Now you need to distinguish that by all the marks, which is just people opening and closing the door. These tend to be a bit more faded, whereas new, fresher marks tends to be a lot clearer, as you can see here. This one here, again, oil marks on the door panel. And next slide, basically zooming into the airbag. Again, just highlighting that airbags are much easier to see, the skin and oil marks. I'm just going to circle this in red. And a zoomed in example as well. A way you can tell whether a person has been wearing a seatbelt is looking at any skin and oil marks left on the seatbelt. Can be very, very tricky. So in this case, I've just highlighted here that it is slightly darker than other parts of the seatbelt, like up here. Sorry. So this is an indication that the occupant had been wearing seatbelt. Sometimes you also find stretching of the seatbelt as well. So basically the patterns of the seatbelt webbing is slightly different where there's a stretch that's occurred, and that is also an indication that the occupant had been wearing a seatbelt. Got a question there. Can facial oil and makeup marks be contaminated by rescuers? Potentially they can. Again, depends on how hard an impact that the occupant had made with the interior vehicle. Airbags generally not, because being cloth, it tends to absorb oil and skin quite well. But the plastic interior of the vehicle potentially can, especially with rescuers using gloves. The cloth will sometimes remove some of the evidence. So yes, brilliant question, and keep that in mind as well. So you may not pick up on every single contact point, but usually enough contact points to understand which direction the occupant had moved in during the crash. Okay. All right, moving on to the last bit of this. Oh, sorry, got another question. What causes oil skin marks and how is it different from regular touching handling? Is it mechanical of the human body during crash? Okay, brilliant question as well. So handling vehicle interior, you usually will leave a mark, not necessarily visible, but as most of us would know, if we've had a vehicle that we've owned for many, many years and we're touching a particular part of it, steering wheel, door handles, you eventually will leave some sort of grease, stain, grime mark if you don't clean it. And that's usually easily cleanable because the force at which you're applying the grime is quite light. With crashes, the impact can be a lot more severe. That is the impact between the occupant and the vehicle interior. Therefore, you tend to leave a much heavier mark, which is not as easily removed. So it's caused by the same elements, skin and oil, just the force that apply between intentional touching and that from an impact is quite different. And hence in an impact, you tend to get much heavier stains and harder to remove stains. So hopefully that answers your question there, Matt. Okay, the last bit of this before we go on to break is the AIS scale, AIS, or abbreviated injury scale. Some people have mentioned to me before that they thought that there was only about 3 levels, 1, 2, and 3, but there's actually 6 or 7. So I'm going to go through it briefly here. AIS is a minor injury. Sorry, AIS1 is a minor injury. AIS2 moderate. AIS3 serious, and this is usually what we look for in Australia, or AIS3 3+. The plus meaning anything from 3 and higher. 4 is a severe injury. 5 is critical. And 6 is maximal, where it is currently untreatable. So there you go. For those who may not have been aware of this, there are actually 6 levels of AIS. In Australia, we tend to say as AIS3+, and for understandable reason, those are the crashes that we're trying to address. There's also a scale called the Maximum Abbreviated Injury Score, and also the Injury Severity Score, or ISS. Maximum Abbreviated Injury Score is basically the maximum injury that has been sustained by an occupant. So AIS is applied to the various parts of the body: the head, the neck, the chest, the abdomen, the upper limbs and lower limbs. Let's say I've got an AIS2 injury on my face, which would usually be let's say a skin, a cut in the skin or bruise. But let's say on my chest, I've actually broken a few ribs. So AIS2 on the head, AIS3 on the ribs. My MAIS would be 3. So you basically pick the body region of the highest AIS and say that is the MAIS. The ISS is actually based on the AIS, and I'm just going to bring up the how it's calculated here. You don't need to know this; it's just background information in case you ever do come across ISS. So basically, you pick the region with the region with the highest AIS score and square it, and then add on the second highest region AIS score, square that as well, and then the third highest region AIS score, square that as well. And that's basically the ISS. Again, you don't need to commit this to heart. This is just purely for background information. And I think you've also got an AIS fact sheet in your kit as well. And that brings it to the conclusion of module 3.2.
Thanks, Tanner. Yeah, and there is a AIS fact sheet in the resource part. We also dropped a couple of the documents people had asked for in last session in there, and we'll keep adding things as we go. Now, Tanner, that's 1 hour into our 2.5 hour module here. Would you like to take a short break now?
Yeah. Let's do that, because next module should be just under an hour, and that'll take us quite nicely to 4 o'clock. And the last module will be about 20 minutes.
Okay, so let's take let's take a 4-minute break, and we'll get back into it in 4 minutes. Thanks.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's continue on now, and yeah, please keep your questions and comments coming in, as you're doing very well in the chat. Over to you, Tanner, for the next module.
Okay. Fantastic. All right, welcome back, and we're just going to go on to module 3.2, which is documentation. And the reason why we're presenting this to you is so that when you do get a crash report, this information will hopefully help you understand what the crash investigators have gone through in documenting the crashes, and potentially where you might pick up occasionally there's happened mistakes as well, and how to question things. Okay, so the topics I'll be covering next hour or so will be scene diagrams. How do you create a scene diagram? How do you photograph the scene? And briefly, the structure of report and report writing. So let's get stuck into topic 1, which is scene diagram. So my recommendation is to start from big items and progressively to move to smaller details. And I think you can probably pick up a theme here now. You start from big and move to small items. You'd also want to walk the tire marks to follow the vehicle path, and I'll explain this through a case study very shortly. You also want to walk the damage from the largest damaged items to the smallest damaged items as well. This is damaged items outside the vehicle, like crash barriers, poles, curbs, so on and so forth. And by doing this, you also are identifying the vehicle to object and all vehicle to vehicle contact points on both the vehicles themselves as well as the objects. And this is how you start piecing together how a crash has occurred. So rarely would you get on scene and just walk it once and say, oh yeah, I know exactly how that occurred. It does happen. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it's usually a series of multiple walkthroughs again and again and again, and piecing together information slightly, slowly, bit by bit. Don't forget to check out the vehicle's roof as well. It tends to get forgotten about, and sometimes there can be quite important details on there. Note also the road features, condition of road, for example, what type of road what type of road surface it is. Weather conditions can be very, very handy as well. And as I mentioned again, you tend to repeat steps 1 to 4 again and again and again to start developing a bigger picture of what actually occurred. As I mentioned before, it's also as much as an art as it is art as much as a science. So quick content warning again. We're going to be showing you images of crashed vehicles. So let's put what I've just mentioned into practice by going through a case study. So what I'm going to present on the next slide is front cover of a report. I don't expect you to read this in detail. I'm just going to walk you through it. So this is a crash report from the US NAS CDS system. As you can see, it contains a reasonable amount of detail here. This is only one page of several dozen pages. What I'm most interested in here is the summary of the crash. So what I've done in the next slide is extract that for you. Voila. Okay, so that's circled in green, and on the right-hand side, I've got a crash diagram, and I'm going to be walking you through that crash diagram sentence by sentence. So you'll see a red circle pop up very shortly in the diagram. So this is vehicle 1, and if we read the summary, it says vehicle 1 was traveling north on a 5-lane, 2-way roadway with a center left turn lane. Vehicle 1 departed its original travel lane, so this is circled in diagram now, to the left, and then just change circles there, depart road to the left. So that's where it departed the roadway. Vehicle 1 traveled across a grass median, return to the roadway and travel across the intersection. So that's there, and then travel across the intersection there. And then the left side of vehicle 1 and the front side impact a tree. The vehicle then rotated clockwise, and the left side of the vehicle impacted another tree. Vehicle 1 came to a final rest position at the point of impact, which is spatially highlighted in red. So that's just a background of this case study that we're going to use. Okay, so what you also find here on this scene diagram is that they've indicated north arrow for compass direction, which is really important. A scale, so you get a rough idea of the travel distance. What they've also included is some details on the road. So they've included the grade. They've also included where event 1 and 2 occurred. Reference points. So this is basically, in this particular example, the user retrieved pole, which as a reference point from which they obtain measurements to, let's say, skid marks and final vehicle resting point, and so on and so forth. So it's important that you indicate your reference point from which you're measuring out as well. That you can, if you wish, indicate items like where lamppost is. And then they've also indicated where event 3 and 4 had occurred, which is the vehicle impacting the tree. What they've also done here is use a second reference point, a utility pole, and they've also indicated this here as well. And again, this can be very, very important when you're reconstructing the scene and understanding distances between reference points and items of interest. Okay, so that's an overview of the a scene diagram, or good scene diagram. We'll go through a few next few slides. So if I were photographing the scene, what I'll do is walk the vehicle path, and I'll be taking images looking forward as well as looking backwards. So let me walk you through what I mean here, and we're going to enlarge this table shortly. So bear with me while I shoot small images. So I place my images in a grid, so I know exactly how they occur in sequence. So this is the first image as the vehicle is traveling in the left-hand lane. This is as it veers left. and starts departing its travel lane, crosses the center line, contacts the curb, gets in the grass, and I take a photo of looking backwards as well at certain points. Sometimes looking backwards can actually give you very important information, so please keep this in mind as well. I keep moving forward and take another photo as the vehicle crosses the intersection, and also I look back as well, and in this image I can see the pole, which is a reference point pole, and I keep walking forward, and after it crosses the intersection I can see the other pole which it made a brief contact with on the left hand side. And the images on the right hand side that have just appeared, those are detailed images of the actual crash location, and I would highly recommend that you take several pictures of this location because you may have debris that's strewn around, and I'll show you examples of that later on. So let's enlarge each of these images. So this is as I started walking. Vehicle started departing its travel lane, crossed the center line, mounted the curb, and you can see where they have indicated, let me just get my laser pointer up here, where the crash investigators have actually marked with chalk where the vehicle had traveled. And we'll go into those marks a bit later on, but I thought I'd just point that out. Travel across the intersection. You can see where it's contacted the pole on the left-hand side, roughed up marks there, and you can see a measuring tape, which the crash investigator used, and also the final resting point, which is straight ahead.
And I'm just reminding everybody that this is a US example, so driving
yes.
on the right hand side.
Thank you, Ken. Very good point. And another close-up. So this is looking back, and you can see some damage there, circled in red. And these are also, this is where I juxtapose the image looking forward and looking back as I walked along the path. That's another example there. Now, just to complete this, although I don't need to show you this, it just, so I'm sure a lot of people are curious as to what actually happened to the car. So I'm going to show you images of the car as well. You can see where it actually contacted the pole at the final rest. This did result in fatality, unfortunately. And this is just, again, start the car, just showing this for completion. Okay, so a couple of items on the C diagram, and I'm repeating myself here, but for very good reason. Please walk the vehicle's path. Really, really, really important when you describe the scene. So put yourself in the position of the vehicle driver, and when you type it, just go through. V1 was traveling northbound in the middle lane or left-hand lane. Vehicle 1 then depart the left-hand lane to the left-hand side. So you just basically go and step. It's almost as if it's from the driver's perspective. Start from big items and then slowly move on to small items. Please include a reference point. Really, really important for those who are going to be going their path of reconstructing crashes on software computers. Include a north cardinal mark, so we know which direction north, south, east, and west is, especially when you use Google Maps to go and investigate from I guess, satellite imaging. Include a scale, really important as well. Without scale, it's almost impossible to recreate a crash. And on the vehicle, for the vehicle, I would also indicate the vehicle initial position and its orientation, its final resting position and its orientation, as well as the collision points along the way and at each impact point. Question come up. Actually, there's been quite a few questions. What's the significance of using V1, V2, etc.? Doesn't V1 mean something specific? V1, it is vehicle 1. So I guess that's the way if you've got multiple vehicle crashes, you use that to indicate which vehicle you're referring to in your notes and on the diagram. You can use VA, VB, VC as well. That's not a problem at all, but I tend to use V1, V2 because that's fairly standard industry. Can you pop up just then?
Yeah, I was going to just asking that is, is there any convention to which one V1 is if there's one that is maybe the bullet vehicle or the like?
I would generally pick V1 as the bullet vehicle, and the bullet vehicle is basically the vehicle, the primary vehicle of interest, and the V2 vehicle 2 is secondary interest. So if a crash occurred at an intersection, and let's say one vehicle is traveling north up your screen, another vehicle is traveling in this direction here, I would say that this is vehicle 1 that impacted vehicle 2 because this is the bullet vehicle. But there is it's fine if you reverse it as well, but it just makes sense to talk about the vehicle that had caused the impact as vehicle 1, because that's the vehicle that you'd be writing about a fair bit.
Yep.
But as long as you're clear, you can use V1, V2, V3 in any order.
Yep.
Yep.
The next question was around just the practical ability to be able to walk the crash scene. I suppose you're mentioning this from a fairly close to the time of crash as well, where freeways may be closed and the like.
Correct. Yep. No, very good question as well. Very good point. If the freeway or road is closed, then yes, you can safely walk it. If you can't, a drive-through may need to suffice. You may be doing that drive-through quite a fair bit, especially on busy roads. So that's not necessarily an ideal way of collecting information, if that makes sense. The best way to do it, obviously doesn't always work, but is when the road is actually closed by the crash investigation team or police. Last questions. Yep.
Yeah.
V1, V2, title applies to pedestrians. Great question. I would probably personally just indicate them as P1, P2, pedestrian 1, pedestrian 2. So that way it segregates vehicles from pedestrians and makes it clearer for a reader. But great question.
Yeah.
Okay, let's keep going on because there's quite a fair bit to cover in this module. Road marks as well, tire marks, tire gouges, and road scrapes, which I'll explain a bit further on. And Bjorn has touched on this very, very briefly in his previous presentation too. Okay, so that's a couple of tips on scene diagram creation. Now, when you're creating a scene diagram, keep a couple of these points in mind. Firstly, clarity of document is really, really important. Again, especially you're going to go and reconstruct the crash. Check to make sure that your description, your written description, actually matches the diagram. There has been a few I've come across which they don't match really well. If you're going to digitize your documents, for example, you're going to scan photos, which hopefully we're not doing in this day and age, but it does happen. Keep in mind the digital losses that may occur. And therefore you may lose some evidence as well. Reference points, really, really important item to highlight. Consider including brief descriptions if you haven't got time to include a detailed description. So again, that should match the scene diagram sketch. Include the compass direction as well. So over the next few slides, I'm just going to walk you through examples of good diagrams. So this one here is the first one that I showed you, and I'll mark up some reasons why it's a good diagram. Firstly, it's very, very clear. Everything's legible. Secondly, you can see the vehicle path very, very clearly. They've even indicated the tire marks there. They've also indicated where the events had occurred, and it matches the scene description. Reference point has been included. They've got the compass direction, north cardinal point, and the scale. I'll go to the next example there. This one here is also another example of a very good C diagram. They've got vehicle 1 and vehicle 2 as well. So vehicle 1, you can see the travel path there, and vehicle 2 traveling behind vehicle 1. And they've also indicated its travel path, and that had rolled over on its side and then onto its back over there. So again, let's just walk through some of the good features of this diagram. Sorry, vehicle 1 path is shown in orange. You've got the vehicle events. So vehicle 1 makes a U-turn. It's indicated there. And you can also see vehicle 2 rollover has been indicated on diagram. So it makes it less ambiguous when you're reading these diagrams. You can indicate short, brief captions. The gouge marks, which has been indicated. So POI stands for point of interest. You've got reference point as well, and reference line. RL stands for reference line. And you've got north cardinal point as well, which is pointing downwards here. Road surface indication, road condition, grade, level, speed limit, and so on and so forth. So these are all the details which make a really good scene diagram. Okay, now I do have a spot quiz. The question is, which is not an important component for crash scene diagram? And your options are scale. Sorry, I should just bring up the whole lot. Scale, north cardinal point, vehicle initial position, vehicle final position, vehicle make and model, tyre/vehicle marks. So this is in relation to crash scene diagram.
Okay, I'll put a poll up there with that in there, Tanner. So, which is not an important component of crash scene diagram. And we'll give that 10 seconds. Now, again, most of the participants here will be, sorry, I should turn my camera on. Most of the participants here will be receiving crash diagrams from the police. And as you know very well, Tanner, and Johan knows probably well, and I certainly do, we get a variety of them, from some absolutely excellent ones to some really, really poor ones. And it can be a little challenging for us to do our work. So, you know, I think as we move forward, and we'll talk a bit about this tomorrow near the end as we're sort of doing wrapping up and things, I think people building real relationships with their local highway patrol, their crash investigators, and helping them to understand what the road authorities are using these diagrams for and the like, and can help them in spending a little bit of extra time at the end of their shift to create a good diagram rather than just scrapping something down. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Now, we've seen lots of answers come in. I'm going to end that poll and I'm going to share the results here. Vehicle make and model seems to be the popular one for this, Tanner.
Yep, and they would be actually spot on. So vehicle make and model would usually go into the report itself. Doesn't mean you can't include it in the diagram, but it's not necessarily an important part of the diagram. So please, if you do speak to police or constables, don't actually correct them with that. It's not an important one for crash reconstruction, whereas the other items are quite important. Okay. All right, so let's go into a bit more detail now about photographing the scene itself. I'll touch on that very lightly, but I was going to take a bit more of a depth here. So vehicle travel path is really important. Take it from the first person perspective, so as if you were the vehicle driver itself. I've mentioned this again in the past. I'm mentioning it again because it is really important. I've seen quite horrendous photos taken in the past, which just do not help at all with the report nor the reconstruction. Do you photograph any road markings? And I'll go through an example of this in the next few slides as for what I mean by road markings. Any damaged objects that you observe along the way, utility poles, light poles, barriers, and so on and so forth. Vehicle to object contact points, so anything, so basically damaged objects. Also take a photo of the vehicle itself where you suspect that the vehicle had contact with object. Take photo of the vehicle itself and use the O-clock system. Okay, so let's get stuck into a case study here for photographing the vehicle, or the scene rather. Okay, so as per usual, I'm just going to give you a quick crash overview. Don't expect you to read this. This is just where I've extracted the information from. And the next slide, I'm going to extract the summary and place it adjacent to the scene diagram, which is on your right-hand side. Okay, so this is, again, just background information so you know what's gone on in this crash. So vehicle one, which I've circled in red here, was traveling southbound. Vehicle one lost control and began to skid laterally clockwise. So I'm just going to show it, walk you through the motion. So that's where it started skidding and it's turned laterally. And departed road on the right side. So the right side, this is relative to the vehicle drive again. So this is why it's really important to identify the vehicle that you're in or you're observing from, and everything is in relation to that vehicle. And impacted the left side of the vehicle on a tree. So again, the reference point is the vehicle, and this vehicle impacted the left-hand side against a tree. So that's the background to this, and let's go through the photograph itself. So again, I put this into a table after I get back from the scene. It just helps me understand what has occurred in sequence, as in what I've taken in sequence, and when I'm looking forward or backwards, because it can get very confusing when you've got dozens of photos. So, but I'm not going to do all this. Let's go straight into the larger image. So this is where the vehicle had started and walking the road. And I continue to walk the road beyond the crest. And this is where you can see where the vehicle tire mark started. So you can see braking has been applied, and they've used chalk to mark that out. And I keep walking the tire marks basically, and this is when it started to rotate laterally. And this is where the tire marks cease, because, well, I guess that's the end of the road, and after that is gravel, but you can see the tire marks there. And this is just positioning the forward facing one. So as I'm approaching the tree, which the vehicle impacted, and looking back at here, so you can see the tire mark in reverse. So again, please do look backwards as well. You can pick up some important information sometimes. And this is the final impact where the front left of the vehicle contact the tree. As always, I always encourage people to walk behind the impact point and take a photo looking backwards as well. You never know when some of this information, the images will come to handy. Okay. Let's go through another example. Okay, so I basically walked you through all of this before. So I mentioned also tire marks is really important to identify, and this is basically what we're looking for: tire marks, and to walk them. So this is the first 3 photos. The second photo of tire marks indicated with chalk mark, and then that's the end of the tire mark. Sometimes you will, this is from another case where a vehicle spun 180 degrees, left the road, and landed in someone's front yard. Fortunately, no one's injured, despite the severity. Well, no one was fatally injured, the severity of the impact. But you can sometimes you will be taking photos of tire marks in the dirt. This one is fairly obvious. Some aren't. Can you just pop up there?
Oh, it's just a question. I think back on the other one is trying to, Naomi was just trying to determine whether the debris was from the vehicle or rubbish that was already at the scene.
At the scene. Brilliant question. This one actually did come from the interior vehicle. So this person had a lot of stuff in the car that was flung outwards.
Thank you. But I suppose that, yeah, you're able to look at that from the vehicle and what's surrounding.
Yeah.
Thanks, Naomi.
Great question, great observation. So this is showing tire marks here, and this is tire marks if a vehicle were to mount unsealed section of path. Some are very, very obvious, like this one here. This vehicle actually lost its front right tire. I was involved in a small head-on crash. And this gouging mark here that you see is basically of the disc itself, of the brake disc, and some of the marking the road, or gouging the road. So it is important to take photos of this. Sometimes you want to get a close-up mark as well. So over here is an example of vehicle that had gouged, the inside of the vehicle had actually gouged out the road, and we circle that in orange and also marked POI, point of interest. So don't just take a photo from standing back, get a close-up as well. And some people actually place a measuring tape next to it, so you can actually get a sense of the scale. If you don't have measuring tape, sometimes even place your phone, a coin, a banknote, something that you can measure readily when you get back to the office, and zoom in, obviously. These are just other examples of tire marks, except some of them are very, 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 very clear, can be easily seen. This one was of the vehicle that I mentioned earlier that lost its front tire, skidded across and basically gouged the surface of the road with its disc brake. And over here is another example where the tire marks are a bit fainter, but can be seen, but you can see that they've been marked by chalk where it started. And you've got a debris field as well that's strewn across. Okay, another spot quiz here. Question is, what important information is missing from this scene diagram? So this goes back to a few minutes ago, and to keep you on the ball. So potential answers are tire/vehicle marks, north cardinal point, vehicle final position, reference point, vehicle final position, or scale. So question is, what important information is missing from the scene diagram?
Okay, I've popped the poll up, and we'll give people a second to have a look at that. Yeah, so we're really just trying to build a really good picture. So whoever is using this for future decision making and the like can have all the information they need. So people are now looking intensely at their screen, so we'll give them another, we'll give them a little bit more time there. And we're just coming up to 1 hour to go in today's session there, Tanner. Just
Yep,
keeping
all good.
on track. I'll give it another 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'm ending the poll now, and let's have a look at the results there. So we did have a bit of a spread on this one, but most people are saying tyre and vehicle marks are not present.
Okay, this one is a very tricky one. I seem to be the king of quick, tricky quizzes.
Yeah.
Okay, so the correct answer is actually a reference point. If you look at the diagram, there's actually no reference point at all. So if you're reconstructing this, it can be very difficult to get an understanding of where things should be positioned. Now, the reason why the tyre marks are not necessarily important is because some crashes don't actually result in tyre marks being left behind. And in this bigger crash, there were no tyre marks. But I agree with some of you that may say, hey, I need to see photos. Absolutely agree with you there that you don't have to have all the complete information. But in this case, it wasn't the tyre marks. Crash don't always have tyre marks. This one was reference point. Okay. So let's keep moving on with photographing the scene. And let's see. Okay. And this is, I'm just going to give you some examples and tips on how to photograph damaged object examples and vehicle to object contact points. Over here, we had a vehicle that had contacted this tree here in question. What I always encourage people to do is grab measuring tapes and go out in sight and can actually lean them up against your point of interest. In this case, it's a tree. So they'll give you a scale. Sometimes you will come across, so in this particular example here, the vehicle veered off the road on the right-hand side, keeping in mind this is US again, and you can see the tire marks that's left behind, but it also contacted this pole here. You can see where the damage has occurred. Sometimes you don't have a measuring tape at hand. It helps to take a photograph of something else with, you can either, it's a known width, so in this case, it's a sidewalk, a footpath. Sorry, I'm using American language here, American terminology here, and that will give you a rough scale as well. So that's a backup if you haven't got a ruler or measuring tape. It also helps to indicate tire marks or any other vehicle contact points with chalk. You can see that this, it's meant to be a roundabout, I'll call it oval about. Other vehicles that also contact this as well, but this is the one of interest. This is where a vehicle actually went almost straight ahead and contact the curb over here. So the items of interest, isolate that with chalk mark where you can. This one's a bit more obvious here. Vehicle frontal impact with this barrier, and you can see where the vehicle tires mount the curb. Again, highlighting that so it's very, very clear when you go when you get home. Okay, our clock system. You're familiar with this? Again, reference point is always the vehicle in question. I wouldn't dwell on this too much longer, but it's just emphasizing the importance of using the system. We're gonna move to photographing the car itself. This is much easier. So I always start with the front. So front, don't just take a photo from on, take it from the side as well. Right hand side front, left hand side front. And this vehicle here had a front collision with another vehicle, and hence damage on the front left-hand side. You then want to go methodically and go to left and right-hand side. I'm just going to show you an example of left-hand side, just be mindful of time. So the left-hand side of the vehicle, you want to photograph the full left-hand side and then go into each individual panel. Tire marks, I will photograph tire as well. You never know that it will give away some information that when you get back to your desk that you need. So zoom in on those as well. And then you go to the rear, again, take a photograph of the rear, rear on, left-hand side, right-hand side, and ideally you also take it from the left and right panels as well. But it gives you a really good idea of the detail that you need to go into. Photograph the roof as well. It can give away information or contain information that you find out later you need. So this year you also get a bonus of photographing the whole left-hand side from above, and you can see all the or the crush, deformation, gouging, scrape marks, and so on and so forth. And this helps enormously when doing reconstruction. Okay, so that's a brief overview of how to photograph the vehicle. Again, start from the front, move to the left or right-hand side, go to the back, and then photograph the roof and zoom into details if need be. Report writing is at the last part here. I should ask, is there any questions so far about photographing the scene? Hopefully the repetition.
Not at this stage, Tanner. Keep moving. Oh.
Yes,
One
great question. In the past,
question.
yes, you bring step ladder as a question. In the past, yes, but nowadays, if you have a what they call a selfie stick, that can actually just be as good as step ladder.
Good. Thank you.
In the past, we used SLR, so yes, you need a step ladder with that. But nowadays, with really high digital cameras built into phones, a lot of people use these selfie sticks. Yes, agree. Drone can be used as well. Yep. And actually, drones can be used on the roadside as well. So if you've got a semi-busy road and you don't actually want to travel down there, riding Australian law allows you to. You could potentially photograph parts of it via the drone as well. But again, check the ATSB or CASA's requirements for flying drones. Okay, and the very last part of module 3.2 is report writing. Okay, so essentially what you're really doing with report writing is translating the scene diagram into words. And I've mentioned this before, I'm going to mention it again, and you're probably going to get sick of me saying you have to be methodical, but you do. You want to walk the reader through the each vehicle's travel path. The main vehicle, or what we call the impact side builder vehicles, is usually V1. I know we had a discussion about this before. You can mix with V1, V2 around. There's no convention that says you have to have this V1. I prefer to. And then subsequent vehicles as V2, V3, V4, so on and so forth. Pedestrian, as a great question came up, P1, P2, P3, so on and so forth. And you also, don't forget, you want to document each and every single impact, the point as well as direction. So on this case study, which is the very, very first case study I present in module 3.2, I'm going to present it again here because it is a really good diagram. They've gone through and marked every single event 1 and 2, occurs at the curb. They've got reference point there, they've got lamppost, and then they've marked event 3 and 4 from there as well. So you know exactly where the vehicle collided each and every time. So this is just my circles of going through the diagram again, and you can basically trace the steps of the vehicle, what it had contacted, where it ended up, and so on and so forth. So this is really important for understanding what had gone on site if you weren't actually there. Okay, also include, as I mentioned in module 3.1, the vehicle details like the make, model, and VIN. And I'll show you how to present this very shortly because it's something we haven't dwelled much on, and mainly because it's easily covered and there are various ways of reporting it. Indicate also the damage location of the vehicle and the damage type as well in the report. So let's go through an example here. Again, this is from the NHTS, from NAS CDS rather, from the US. And this is from the case study I presented earlier on with the Honda Silver vehicle that impacted the pole. Sorry, yep.
There's just an observation in there that the diagrams don't seem to be using road names or street names on there. Is that an intentional thing or?
Great question. It is intentional, and the reason why is because NAS CDS data is available to public, and for privacy reasons, they remove all that data or they don't document in the first place. What they do document is GPS coordinates, but that's kept from the public when you go to the database. So for privacy reasons. But
certainly in the Australian and New Zealand ones, we see as road authorities representatives, we do get the street names on there, so you're able to easily ensure that you've got the right intersection.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great observation there.
Okay, so in this particular example, which is based on the case study just presented, what we have is a vehicle VIN, which is there. We've also got the year model, the make, in this case a Honda, and also the model, vehicle model, which is Honda Accord. I note that for those who have may have noticed, this Honda Accord model is actually not available in Australia. It's a two-door coupe model. just in case you were wondering and might have picked that up. Body type is a two-door sedan with a hardtop coupe. So this is some of the key information that you want to consider including in your report. Again, it's not a must, but the greater level of detail you go into, the better the reconstruction potential is. But at the same time, you need to balance that as well with how much you're really going to go through, because you could spend days on documenting these things. The weight is very important as well, even for high-level reconstruction, which I'll go through in module 3.3, which is coming up next. And also cargo weight, something that tends to get locked off a lot of investigations. You may have 40, 60 kilos of luggage in the back if they're traveling to the airport, for example, or traveling in state and moving houses. So that can actually make a difference on how the vehicle behaves, especially with something like an SUV or station wagon, where they could be carrying a good 80 kilos. So keep that in mind as well. Okay, damage location. So we've gone through this before, but I'll go through it again anyway. So I'll use the same case study of this on the cord. And this is basically how we mark the damage location. So cross-hatching, indicating the most severe damage there. And you can basically see the outline that this person is traced, and hatched up all the front as well as the windscreen, saying it's all been quite severely damaged. So that's how you indicate the damage on the vehicle. Like on side on as well. So you do this for all aspects of the vehicle, front, rear, side, and top. So you can indicate the damage that's occurred here. So most severe damage here, and you can see that they've just single line crossed this out as there has been some damage, and you can indeed see some damage there. This is not from direct impact, so this is not crushed. This is deformation. So this has been sustained by the vehicle impacting the tree, and then deforming this panel here. Someone mentioned curb weight cut. Yep. Okay, Ken, answer that. Brilliant. Thank you, Ken.
While we're on that, do you know off the top of your head, curb weight has fuel? I think it has half a tank.
Curb weight is usually is with fuel, so it's what we call wet weight.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So the way I think about it is that the vehicle's parked next to the curb. What do you need in it to get it roadworthy? And generally, there's some fuel in it to get it to that location, and engine oil, and so on and so forth. So that's with all fluids inside.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, let's move on. Okay, occupants. So something that you want to document is the number of occupants. So I would number each occupant. So be O1, O2, O3, O4, or just 1, 2, 3, 4 if you prefer. Occupant demographic details can be very important. I'll go through an example of this next slide. The occupant injuries like AS can be important as well, depending again on what your report's aiming at. And sorry, occupant injuries as in what type of injuries they may sustain. So it could be a bruise, it could be broken bones, and so on and so forth, but also the severity as well, which is indicated by AS. Airbag status, whether airbag has actually been deployed or not, and seatbelt usage. So let me use that same Honda Accord crash case study to give an example of how I would have documented this. So there was only one occupant in this vehicle, this driver. So I would say vehicle 1, occupant 1. So V101 basically. So it's very, very clear which vehicle this occupant is in. Occupant 1 is generally the driver. So you always start with the driver, and then occupant 2 is usually a front seat occupant if there is one, if not the passenger rear seat. Again, I don't mind if you go left to right or right to left, as long as it's consistent. So here they said vehicle occupant number is number 1. The age of driver is 64 years old, height 175, and weight 6'3", gender is male. So this is what I mean by occupant demographic details. Next few items: occupant injury, injury severity, airbag status, and seatbelt usage. So here, let me walk you through this. So for vehicle 1, the driver, they were located in front left side, keeping in mind this is US again. Airbag seatbelt not used. So basically means that they were not wearing the seatbelt. I somewhat disagree with NACDS saying airbag not used, because you don't have a choice in that sometimes. But again, so this is side note, side tangent. I thought I'd point this out. Some of you very, very observant people probably asking me about this. Yeah, so this is one item I disagree with. I would have just said have a drop-down box saying seatbelt used, seatbelt not used. That's it. Over here is the injury that this person has sustained. So the aorta. Actually, let me not review through this. It's take a while. So basically, sustained a lot of internal chest injuries and suffered quite a lot of blood loss as well. In here, so this is what we mean by occupant injuries. And then this is here where we put down the AIS level. So here it's 5, AIS 5, which means critical. So that gives you a rough idea of what I'd be looking for in a good detailed report. Any questions so far? There's actually 2 there. Okay. Are child restraints recorded differently? E.g., forward facing, rear facing, 5-point harness? Yes, brilliant question as well. Yes, I would definitely record that as exactly as Alicia had you say that if a child restraint was used, you would indicate that in the as an occupant, and you indicate it in one of these columns or cells. Child restraint was used, or occupant restraint and child restraint, and then you would have the top child restraint, forward, rear facing, and so on and so forth. So yes, you can go to further detail there, but you treat that child as an occupant and just give them all 3, or 2, or 3, or 4.
What's the name of the organization these were the examples are coming from?
So it's from NAS CDS. So I'll spell that out. It's NASS hyphen CDS. Charlie Delta Sierra.
Yeah. And the maximum severity there is that MAIS, MAIS?
Correct, yes. So in this particular case, MAIS would be 5. So absolutely spot on. Glad someone's actually already using this.
And
the knowledge.
And if the driver eventually dies as a result of the crash, does that go up to a level 6?
Great question as well. I'm really loving these questions because I can see you really engaging with the material now. So the short answer is no, it doesn't. So you would assess the injuries, and they may still be alive at the scene while you're assessing injuries or taking them to the hospital. But if they die from that level of severity, we wouldn't mark it up to a 6. So these injuries would indicate, because it's only case 5, it indicates to me that it is treatable, whereas IAS 6 is untreatable, currently untreatable. So you don't up-rev it, for lack of better terminology. If they die, you just leave it as it is, because people can actually die from an AIS 3 injury as well. So that's a serious injury. And a definition, if you go by the WHO standards, it's a death caused by a road accident can occur within 30 days. So they may be in hospital for an AIS 3 injury for, let's say, 28 days and then die on the 29th day. But you wouldn't increase the AIS 3 injury to an AIS 6 because it is treatable.
Okay.
And I think
that covers off the questions.
Yeah.
I suppose have a look at the AIS fact sheet that we've popped in there as well to help people get their head around that, because it's slightly different to I suppose the way we think about it from a crash statistics perspective in terms of number of deaths and number of serious injuries. So slight nuance there.
Yeah. So now you assess the patient or the victim, and you allocate AIS at the time of inspection, and you don't change that because they can still die from AIS 3, 4, 5 injury, is what I'm saying.
Yep. Thank you.
Is that where a system approach post-crash care would pop up as a factor if there was a delay in, say, getting someone to hospital? Sure.
So a lower level injury in the actual impact, and then lying out on the roadside for many hours increases the severity of that incident.
Generally speaking, not. So if you have 3 broken ribs, for example, from the side of a crash, and you were in rural Australia and they ambulance couldn't get to you for 2 hours, you generally wouldn't rupture, or you generally wouldn't cause. You generally would not have further result injuries unless you're moving about quite a fair bit. In those instances, I guess it gets a bit blurred, but in my experience, generally what has been assessed at the crash site is fairly accurate. But if you were in a remote location, ambulance can get to you for 2-3 hours, whatever it is, and you have managed to extricate yourself out the car and you sustain some bruises because you fall on the ground. Unfortunately, that's likely to be coded as part of what somebody is saying in the crash. And that's when errors, I guess, inadvertent errors can occur. And this is why documenting the inside of the vehicle very carefully is quite critical here to understand what has occurred from the crash versus that occurred post-crash. Johan's popped up.
Yeah, it was just sort of a slight different angle in this is that, I mean, the AAS scale has been revised and is still revised based on someone mentioning post-crash care. And it is relevant in the sense that we are better and better in treating those injuries. So something that would be an AAS 3 or 4 a few decades ago or a decade ago might now pop down to AAS 2 in the new classification because we're better at treating the same type of injury. So it is over time changing, but not, as you say, on the actual crash site, on the actual event in itself, but more over time as treatments gets better.
Very good point, Johan. I'm glad you brought that up as well. And if anyone looks up AIS in the AIS system, that is, you'll note that there has been updated. So one thing I would caution you on is if you were analyzing a crash database that uses AIS, just try to find out which AIS year or version they're using, because it did change partway through. So you may not necessarily be analyzing the same AIS level, if that makes sense. Thank you, Johan. That's a very good point.
Okay. Tanner, we've got about 40 minutes left.
That's cool. We've only got 2 more slides on this module, so we're making really good time. So the very last 2 slides, I just want to cover recommended structure of your report. So I usually start with a case identifier. So it could be 00001 as in the very first case investigating, and so on and so forth. And the reason why I put zeros in front of it is when you it's for filing reasons. So I tend to name my files 0001, 002, and so on and so forth. The problem is that if you don't put zeros in front of it, the Windows has a tendency to go from, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 as an order. And then when you go to 10, it puts it back up as 1 because it reads 1 and 10 as next to each other. So hence I always use 0. So a bit of a tip there. Write a summary of each crash at the very start, as you've seen lots of summary crashes that I've given examples of. Then go into the vehicle details and the crash damage, and then into document details and their injuries, and any road observations, the weather details, road conditions, and so on and so forth after that, and then environmental observations. So this is the recommended structure. You can move them around as you see fit, but this is what I use. And that's pretty much the end of module 3.2. So we're a few minutes ahead of schedule.
Okay. So question there, can we put an example of a crash report into the references? I think we can do that. We might even put a few in from different jurisdictions just to show. We will ensure we redact any personal information, and that's, I suppose, brings up another just general good practice thing for us, again, as road authority people, either representatives or working for a road authority, in terms of looking at these crashes. If you get a crash report that does have personal details in it, just black it out immediately. We don't need that. That's not information that's relevant to our roles, and it causes just a lot of privacy issues and challenges going forward. So yeah, immediately blank that out, and you can let your local highway patrol and things know that that's not a requirement in the crash diagram. Those specific individual identifiers, be it a number plate, a name, or the like. We just need to know vehicle 1, vehicle 2, and the information that Tanner's nicely put through there. Okay, good. Do you want to give everybody a minute stretch while you change over the slides there, Tanner?
Yeah, let's do that. The next slide, 3.2, is quite short, about 20 minutes. So if everyone wants to come back at, if you're okay with it, 4 o'clock, Ken?
4 o'clock, yeah. So
yeah, make it on the dot.
5 minutes time, if people are in a different time zone, don't come back at 4 o'clock if you're in New Zealand. But yeah, so 5 minutes time. Okay, so we'll move into the final sort of sub-module of this module 3. And then at the end, we'll have a little bit of time for any further questions, and I will jump into the learning management system just to show people again where things are and make sure everybody's ticking along. So back to you, Tanner.
Okay, so welcome to the final module in this session. It is fairly brief. I just want to give you a brief overview of what crash reconstruction is performed for, and the 3 types of software that can be used, although there's a bit of blurring amongst them nowadays, but I'll go through that in very shortly. Okay, so the topics I'll cover in module 3.3 is purpose of crash reconstruction, the classes and examples of crash simulation applications. So let's just get stuck into topic number 1. So there are a number of reasons why you or someone else may want to perform a crash reconstruction. So for example, you may want to verify your at-scene analysis to make sure that what you had documented could actually, the crash could actually have occurred. So it's a reality checking away. You want to verify someone else's at-scene analysis to find out whether they're right or wrong. You may also want to understand variables that contribute to a crash. You may want to understand the interventions to counter a similar future crash and whether that may be an effective intervention. You may be performing testing, or you may test interventions before conducting actual physical crash testing itself. Simulations tend to be a lot cheaper to run than actual crash testing. You may also want to, or you may be engaged in an expert witness case as well, in which case crash reconstruction may be called for. So I'll go through a few examples of these items here. So firstly is verifying your at-scene analysis or verifying someone else's at-scene analysis. So let's say I've just come back from site and I've said a particular vehicle here. Let me just get my laser pointer up again. Pointer, there we go. So vehicle here has traveled off the road and has turned clockwise and rolled 8 times. So I want to know whether my assumption from my crash scene analysis is actually feasible or not. So I go back to my office and use, in this case, PC crash. So you can see the NatCDS report is in black lines, and the PC crash, which is my own simulation, is done in red. So in this particular crash here, I question whether NatCDS is actually correct or not, that the vehicle that had traveled at their set speed, that had rolled over, would actually travel this distance from the point here, which is the tripping point, so where the vehicle turned onto its side and then ended up here. So I had done this several dozen times and could not get the vehicle to roll that far, which doesn't actually mean that NatCDS is wrong. It just means that there's something not quite right in either the evidence gathering or their interpretation of the scene. So this is where you may want to use PC crash and validate either your own assumptions or someone else's assumption from the crash scene. I've grouped this in number 3, 4, 5, 6 in one, because this is really understanding interventions and variables that can contribute to crash. They are somewhat similar. And also applying to expert witness cases. So I'm going to give you the example here. So again, this is from NatCDS. So vehicle 1 was traveling along, and it's actually from the previous crash cases with the debris from the inside car strewn outside. So let's say I was engaged in an expert witness case, or I'm doing a reconstruction for the DOT to understand what may have prevented this case from a vehicle perspective or a driver perspective. And I say, okay, this is what actually happened, and we validate it by performing reconstruction that mimics this crash and say, yep, all that's feasible, all that's fine. So there's nothing questionable about the crash scene and data gathering and assumptions there. But we then say, okay, what happens if, let's say this vehicle is not fitted with ABS brakes. Let's say what happens if it was fitted with ABS brakes. Sorry, let's take a step back. What happens if the brake was applied a bit later? Then PC crash could be run, and you say the brakes were applied later or applied at less pressure, and then it will then show that the vehicle had actually gone past this tree and then end up here, wherever that may be on the road. Someone just asked whether it's a black line skid mark. Yes, it is a skid mark. So yep, you are correct in saying that. Good observation there. So a grey line here is basically saying, okay, what happens if the driver applied less pressure on the brakes? Would they have missed a tree? And we could say, yeah, likely to have missed a tree, but could have impacted something else further down the road. And then we say, okay, what happens if you applied the brake a bit earlier or a bit harder? And let's say it engaged ABS, and we could then run simulation with those parameters and say, right, they would likely stop around about here and miss a tree, and so on and so forth. So you get the idea. And we can also then say what happens if they applied brakes early and also put in greater steering input. They potentially could have ended here. So again, these are all scenarios that you could rerun on crash simulations and try to understand what could have prevented that crash from occurring. Or if you were working in infrastructure, you say, okay, what happens if we did have a barrier here before the tree? What type of crash would have resulted against the barrier, and would that result in fatality? And so on and so forth. So this is one of the great items about doing crash reconstruction. So you can play around with a lot of hypotheses and situations. Okay, so that's right. Let's go into the second part of this module, which is to do with crash simulator applications. As I mentioned, there are three key types. First one's momentum analysis. Second one's energy and momentum analysis. So this is in level of detail. And the third one is engineering analysis. So the first one here is momentum analysis, which is basically, it's really just based on Newton's laws of motion and conservation of energy, which I won't go through because I actually cannot remember off the top of my head. So forgive me for that. The key variables that you generally need for this type of reconstruction is very, very high level stuff like vehicle mass, the friction between tire and road surface, starting position of the vehicle, the final resting position, the road geometry, and vehicle speed. This is usually best done with single vehicles, two vehicle collisions, where the mass difference between the two vehicles, two objects is not greater than 1 in 10. An example of this software is called Virtual Crash. Now, I will make a slight comment here that Virtual Crash is starting to blur into the next level, which I'll show you next slide. But I'll also got a very quick video which I'd like to show you about from Virtual Crash. This was taken from the website, so you can see what it looks like. If I can get it started, just bear with me for 1 second. Let me just swap my laser pointer back to a cursor. So that's basically what this looks like, and this is another example as well. That example. Okay. All right, so we'll move on to the next slide. So that's Virtual Crash. So the next level is energy and momentum analysis. So I said Virtual Crash is starting to veer into this side as well. So when you build up software, it's very easy to expand on it, and I can see why Virtual Crash is starting to encroach on energy plus momentum analysis. So this is very similar to momentum analysis, which is the basic reconstruction. However, what it takes into account is energy absorption by the vehicles themselves, whereas the previous one generally doesn't. You go into a further level of detail with this. So for example, here you would ideally specify the center of gravity, the track width, the tire properties, skidding suspension properties, vehicle shape, and so on and so forth. And you can also specify multiple impacts, and you can also analyze vehicle impacts with solid objects as well. So examples of this is PT Crash, HVE, and Virtual Crash. As I said, they're starting to blur, so there's not a distinct line sometimes. I'm going to show you a video of something that's been obtained from PT Crash. So this is on this slide here, so you get an idea of what this looks like. Okay. Okay, so you've got a few good different perspectives there. And next, bear with me 1 second, please. Does not want to move to the next slide. Ah, there we go. Okay, so the third level and the most detailed one is in engineering analysis, and this is generally called in the engineering world finite element modeling. It is phenomenally detailed and usually requires, in general, software that does run on I guess a generic term, a supercomputer. So you may be using up to 24, 36 processors and several tens of gigs of RAM as well to store the results. It allows for everything that we've mentioned in the past, but also go down to the point of sheet metal properties, glass property, polymer properties, seatbelt operating properties, and reaction time, and so on and so forth. So it's very, very detailed. It does take a phenomenal amount of time to build up a model as well from scratch. Could be weeks and months. So as I mentioned, allows for restraint, as in seatbelt reaction time, airbag reaction time, and so on and so forth. So you can play around with this. And you can also insert dummies. They're called anthropomorphic test devices, in technical term, but actually dummies. You can insert them as well. So this is actually from one of my crash reconstructions here. Is a Ford, I think it's Ford Explorer. Yes, it is Ford Explorer. And as a roller crash test that I was performing, trying to understand where this particular occupant sustained the engine rollover sequence. And so dummies inserted there. And I brought the dummies' chest because they had sustained chest injuries into small segments to study them individually as well. So examples of finite element modeling software is LS-DYNA, Manimo, and PC Crash. I know listed as previous one, energy momentum analysis. They are starting to venture a bit more into engineering analysis here as well. So as mentioned before, there is a bit of blurring here as well. So don't take this guide as a hard and fast rule. This is just general rule. And next slide, I'll just walk you through. I'll just show you a video of what this actually looks like. So this is a Toyota Corolla impacting a rear of a truck. And the reason why I see this in different colors is because these are elements that have been used to build up the vehicle itself. You can see that even the seat has a lot of details as well. So it's not just a seat. It actually goes, you basically pull apart the seat and reconstruct it in the virtual world. Hence, it's a very, very time-consuming process. And you only do this, for example, if you're an automotive manufacturer like Ford, Holden, Mercedes, whatever it is, this is where you would save money rather than crash testing vehicles, which can cost tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars per crash. You do this via simulation first. Okay, let's just get stuck in this. So that's the crash test. Okay, so as you can see there, all of these elements of the ATD or dummy are basically built up one by one and assembled in the car. And hence it's very, very detailed software. Lots of fun to play with, but very, very time intensive and computing intensive. Let's go to the next slide. So I think this is another simulation that's from top down. Let's see if we can get this to play. There you go. The reason why it's running very, very slowly is because the intensity of the computer is required. You can speed it up after you've done the first run and calculation, and from then on, it's basically video. This is what we call the wireframe of the vehicle. So you take away all the panels and you see what is actually happening to the underlying structure here, which has been used to build up the vehicle. And my mistake is actually Yaris, not a Corolla. I just saw that pop up. This is where you can analyze the forces on the dummy as well. So you can actually put virtual transducers inside the dummy and measure force against time. So this is measuring the force of the seatbelt. Okay, I think that's pretty much wraps up this session as well as module 3.3.
Okay, thanks, Tanner. So I suppose we wanted to, in this final module, give you a bit of a few insights into crash reconstruction modeling and the like. Obviously, not getting into the details of how to develop those and create those and use that software and the like, but we just wanted to sort of at least ensure everybody had a rounded view of what sort of crash modeling and crash prediction software there is, or sorry, crash modeling and reconstruction software there is out there and available. Now, it doesn't look like we've got any other specific questions coming in at this stage, Tanner, but what I will do is just show everybody again a little bit in the learning management system, and then we may give people 10 minutes to finish off their quiz, and or those who are a little bit behind might have some time to catch up. But okay, we have here the crash investigation module, as you see, and we've just completed module 3 there. So in there, we put another copy of the AIS fact sheet because that was mentioned, but of course you can get that from the resources here, and you can see that the AIS fact sheet's in there, the ANCAP assessment protocol, which was is now in there, some paper in there on barrier effectiveness, which somebody asked for, and some information on crash reduction factors, and another one on wire rope safety barriers, the head injury criteria fact sheet, human impact force paper, the Vision Zero for coroners, the New Zealand link to that website, which is a good one. Little video of UN explaining why road safety barriers are good in areas where there's even looks like a cleared roadside, which I thought I'd pop in there as we were thinking about barriers, and I went into the barriers folder, and so we've got that. And then let's go back though, and we've just finished module 3, so you're going to go to the quiz. Of course, you've got the slides there, and we will upload the recording in here, and you'll go, of course, into the quiz, and you've got 3 attempts at it. You'll have a go at the quiz, and there you go. You've got a bit of a drag and drop to do. We've got some different crashed vehicles for you to work through, and you'll be utilizing the knowledge that you've gained throughout this session, and do a little bit of analysis yourself. Okay, it's going to stop sharing there, and I think that pretty much gets us to the point where we're able to let people go. If you have anything that you would like us to cover, so we've got the final session tomorrow. We do have UN doing a lot of sort of discussion about how we use this information, how we get a good system outcomes. I've got some time at the end where I'm going to, depending on how much time we have left, talk a little bit about our immediate responses when we do fatal investigations and the like, and quick treatments that can be done. And then how we might filter those up into larger, more systemic changes, and gathering that sort of intel. But certainly if there is a particular thing you would like covered, feel free to email that through, or bring it along tomorrow, and we'll allocate a little bit of time. There will be an assignment at the end of tomorrow, which will have a little bit more meat to it, and that'll be your final thing to do. Hopefully this quiz today won't take a huge amount of your time, but yeah, there is one that there'll be a little bit more intensive at the end of next session, which will be your final completion task for this course. Okay, I think that's about it. Yeah, all right. Well, thank you very much. Jump in there, use your last 10 minutes here to finish your quizzes, and lots of hands clapping coming in there for you, Tanner, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you. Bye.